The storm came like a thief in the night, child. One moment, I was sitting on my porch, listening to the crickets sing in the dark, and the next moment, the sky opened up as though God himself was weeping. The rain didn't fall gently. No, it slammed against the earth like fists on a door. The river behind my little house rose with anger, and before I could save even a photograph, the water broke through. Therefore, I watched my home, the place where I raised your father, the place where your grandfather built every wooden beam with his hands, swallowed by the flood. I remember standing barefoot in the mud, clutching only a small bag with what little I could grab. The sound of furniture breaking, walls crumbling, and memories dissolving into water still echoes in my ears when I close my eyes. But I survived. And survival, my dear, always comes with choices. I could have stayed there, sitting on that broken porch that no longer existed, waiting for pity to arrive. But I told myself, no. I will not drown with my house. I will walk. And therefore, I walked through the storm, through the rising water, to the only place I thought I would be welcomed, my son's home. When I arrived at his big white house, I was trembling, wet to the bone, my clothes clinging to my skin. My hair was dripping, my hands were shaking, and yet I carried hope in my heart. I knocked, child, with the same hand that once rocked him to sleep when he was a baby. And he opened the door. My son. My own flesh and blood. At first, he looked shocked. He said, "Mom. What happened?" I told him, with tears streaming down my face, the water took everything. I have nowhere to go. For a moment, I saw the little boy in his eyes, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, the boy who once whispered, "Don't ever leave me, Mommy." But then his wife came to the door. She looked me up and down, her face sharp like glass. And she said words that sliced deeper than any flood could. She said, "We want privacy." Child, do you understand the weight of those words? Privacy. As if I was a stranger. As if the woman who carried him for 9 months, who sacrificed meals so he could eat, who worked day and night after his father died, as if I was nothing but a shadow at his door. But I stood there, trying to smile, trying to pretend her words didn't cut me. I said, "It's only for a little while. Just until I can find a way, rebuild, stand again." My son looked at her, then at me. He said nothing. His silence was worse than her cruelty. Therefore, I knew in that moment that the flood had not just taken my house. It had revealed the truth of my family. I was no longer welcome, where I thought love would live forever. That night, as I sat outside on their porch, the rain still falling around me, I whispered to myself, if my own child can turn me away, then I must turn toward something greater. I must turn toward strength. And child, that was the beginning of the hardest lesson I ever learned. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals do not come from strangers, but from those we gave everything to. Child, when your son turns you away, where do you go? When your home is gone and the family you built with your very breath closes the door, what do you do? That night, I asked myself that question as I sat on their porch, wet and shivering. Therefore, I rose. I told myself, you must walk again. And I walked into the dark streets, with no umbrella, no plan, no safety. The rain soaked me, but my tears burned hotter than the storm. I found shelter in a church basement that night. The priest didn't ask questions, he just gave me a thin blanket and a bowl of soup. The soup was watery, but it was kindness in a bowl. And kindness, child, can taste richer than gold when you have nothing. But life did not grow easy. Every morning, I searched for work. I scrubbed floors in diners where no one even looked me in the eye. I washed dishes until my fingers cracked from soap. I folded laundry for strangers, while my own clothes stayed damp and smelling of mildew. Therefore, I learned the art of swallowing pride. Pride does not feed an empty stomach. Pride does not give you shelter. Survival does. There were nights when I lay awake in that cold church basement, listening to the whispers of the other lost souls. Some were broken by alcohol, some by mistakes, some by cruelty of others. I whispered my prayers among them, not because I expected miracles, but because speaking hope aloud kept my heart alive. But child, there was one moment that changed everything. One morning, as I was scrubbing the floor of a small office, an old man in a suit stopped and watched me. He said, "You work like this place belongs to you." I smiled, though my back ached. I said, "Work is work. If I do it, I must do it with honor." He studied me, and then he asked, "Have you ever cooked?" "Cooked? My dear," I laughed right there on my knees. I said, "I have cooked more meals than I can count. I fed a husband. I fed a boy who grew into a man, and I fed anyone who came to my table." That man offered me a chance, not charity, but work. He owned a small restaurant, and he needed someone who knew how to cook from the heart. Therefore, I took that chance. I stood in his kitchen, cutting onions, kneading dough, stirring pots as though my life depended on every flavor. And it did. Customers came not just for the food, but for the love I poured into every plate. But it was not easy, child. My hands blistered, my feet swelled, and I often worked until midnight. Yet every dollar I earned, I saved. I told myself, one day, you will not just survive. You will rise. Years passed like this. Seasons changed outside the window of that little restaurant. The rain stopped haunting me, and the flood became a distant memory. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The restaurant grew. People began to line up outside. They said, "There's something about this woman's food, it tastes like home." Therefore, the owner, that kind old man, offered me a share. He said, "This place thrives because of you. Let's build it together." Child, I cried that day, not because of money, but because someone finally saw my worth when my own blood had not. But even as I built a new life, the wound of my son's rejection never closed. Every birthday of his that passed, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, I sat alone at my little corner table after the restaurant closed, wondering if he ever thought of me. And one day, I heard whispers. My son had fallen on hard times. His wife, the sharp-tongued woman who once said she wanted privacy, had left him. His big white house had cracks in the walls, bills piled up, and friends turned their faces away. Therefore, I knew the day would come when the circle of life would turn, when he would remember me, not as his mother who begged for shelter, but as a woman who had built herself back from ashes. And child, that day was closer than I imagined. Child, do you remember how I said the circle of life always turns? Well, it happened sooner than I thought. One evening, after closing the restaurant, I found a letter slipped under the door. My name was written in a familiar hand, shaky, but still his. It was from my son. "Mom," it read, "I know I have no right to ask. But I need help. Please." Therefore, I sat there in that dark, empty restaurant with the letter trembling in my hands. My heart ached, for I was still his mother. But my mind remembered that night in his backyard, the words that cut deeper than knives, "Why is she even still alive?" But I did not throw the letter away. I folded it carefully and placed it in my pocket. Because sometimes, revenge is not screaming, or anger, or violence. Sometimes revenge is silence, dignity, and timing. 2 weeks later, he came. Not to my home, for he didn't even know where I lived now, but to the restaurant. I saw him standing outside, thinner than I remembered, his shoulders bent. His children were not with him. His wife was gone. He looked like a man who had lost everything. He walked in slowly, and when his eyes met mine, they filled with shame. He whispered, "Mom, it's me." Therefore, I stood tall, though my knees shook inside. I looked at him the way he once looked at me on that rainy night, when I begged for shelter. I said, "Sir, do you need a table for one?" He flinched, as though my words were knives. He said, "Please, don't do this. I was wrong. I should never have turned you away. I lost everything, Mom. I need you now." But I remembered every year of silence. Every holiday he never called. Every night I prayed for a son who never came. And I also remembered the years of hard work, the calluses, the hunger, the tears I turned into strength. So I told him, when I stood in the rain, "You told me you wanted privacy. Tonight, I will give you the same gift. Privacy. Because I will not open my door again." He sank into the nearest chair, his face buried in his hands. "Please, Mom. I have nothing left." Therefore, I pulled out a small envelope from my apron. Inside was a check, not for him, but for his children, my grandchildren. I placed it on the table and said, "This is for them, not for you. A mother cannot let her blood starve. But you must learn the weight of your choices." He lifted his face, wet with tears. "So this is your revenge?" I whispered, steady and cold, "No. This is justice." And I turned, child, and walked away. My heart was heavy, but also free. That night, as I sat back in my small home, this same home where we now sit, you and I finally understood. Revenge is not about making another suffer. It is about standing tall where once you were broken. Therefore, I share this story with you so you may learn, never let the cruelty of others steal your dignity. Never let betrayal poison your soul. Rise. Build. And when the time comes, face them not with anger, but with truth. Because the greatest revenge, child, is living strong enough to show them that the one they cast aside became the one who survived. The grandmother leans back, her wrinkled hands resting on her grandchild's. Her eyes glisten, not with bitterness, but with hard-earned peace. The camera of life slowly fades on her small, humble home, a kingdom built not from riches, but from resilience.